One vote away, how a single Supreme Court seat can change our history. One vote away in bookstores today. Senator, I want to talk about the book, but I want to talk first about last night. You are perhaps the best debater ever to sit in the United States Senate, at least based on your college and law school and Supreme Court career. What did you make of last night?
Well, I thought it was a mud fest. I think there were a lot of blows thrown. I thought it was messy. At the end of the day, I don't think either side changed the fundamentals of the election. I think everyone who was with Trump at the beginning is still with him. I think everyone who was with Biden at the beginning is still with him.
I do believe there is a big winner and a big loser. The big winner is Judge Amy Coney Barrett, who got praise from Joe Biden and absolutely no rallying of the left to defeat her. And I think the big loser is Chris Wallace. And I like Chris, but, you know, this job is impossible if you interject yourself. I've done it 4 times. You remember me doing it. You've just got to fade into the background.
I think Wallace did an abysmal job. I think he was whiny and petulant. I think he wanted to be the center of attention. I think he prevented them. Now, look, this is not an easy debate this was not an easy debate to moderate. I will give him that. But it was much more about him than about the debaters. And I also think it's not complicated that Chris Wallace is voting for Joe Biden, that his politics are liberal. And he, the snide comments he made after several of Trump's comments, I think had no business coming from a debate moderator, and repeatedly his questions were essentially an Oppo research dump, that they were equivalent of asking Trump, when did you stop beating your wife? And he didn't do that on the other side. It was clear which side he was rooting for, and that's a bad thing for a debate moderator.
I joked this morning that I spotted Steve Scully at Dulles in sunglasses buying a ticket to South America, which Steve retweeted. But I actually think he'll be good. His ego's not going to be engaged. He's just going to ask a question and lay back.
I think that's – and, it was interesting. The first question Wallace asked was good. The Supreme Court question, the way he teed it up, he said, Trump, you say X, Biden, you say Y. Tell us why you're right. That's actually a pretty good debate question for a moderator. And the way he teed it up, it was not super editorialized. It was a pretty fair characterization of each of their arguments. And then he said, all right, go. That is much more appropriate than trying to jump in at every time. There were several times I thought the president had Biden on the ropes. For example, when Biden said, lots of law enforcement are supporting me, and Trump said, fine, name one law enforcement organization in America that's supporting you. And Biden blinked in terror and had no answer, and then Wallace jumped in, let's move on.
It was a lifeline. It was like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Let's go back to one vote away. Last night, the question was posed of the vice president. Will you veto? He didn't say it the right way. Chris Wallace could have said, would you veto court packing? He asked, will you take a position on it? Joe Biden wouldn't. In interviews after the debate, Kamala Harris refused to answer the same question from John Dickerson of CBS, from Jake Tapper of CNN. They will not answer a question. And you covered this in one vote away. Why is court packing such a fundamental threat to the republic, and why won't Democrats answer it?
Well, let me start with the second question first, which is they won't answer it because they intend to pack the court if they get power. That this Democratic Party is controlled by the far left. If we wake up in January with Biden, Schumer, Pelosi, in the opening weeks, Schumer will end the filibuster, which will end the ability of the Senate minority to stop them ramming through their agenda. After they do that, I think one of the things we will see early on, they will admit 2 additional states to the United States. They'll admit the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico. The reason they're doing so is crassly political, which is that Democrats believe that adding those 2 will add 4 Democratic senators. And then I fully believe that they will move to pack the court, and I think they will likely have the votes to do it. And that politicizes the court. It destroys the independence. We've seen a Democratic president try to pack the court previously. FDR did it, and his own party resisted him. His own party said, no, we don't want the court to be a political body. Today's Democrats, I don't believe would resist one iota, and I think it's where they're headed if they get power.
I want to go to the end of One Vote Away, how a single Supreme Court seat could change history. Ted Cruz's new book. Senator, you write on page 224, chaos erupted about the Senate confirmation hearings, and I believe the Senate Democrats callously took advantage of Dr. Ford. Hugh Hewitt's prediction is that the torpedo that will be put in the water against Amy Coney Barrett is her service as chairman of the hiring committee at Notre Dame and as a member of tenure and promotions, which every tenured member of the faculty has to be. We're going to hear from disappointed job seekers and disappointed promotion seekers who are going to blame ACB. Will you commit to refusing to reopen the hearings and working the chairman to refuse to reopen the hearings when they pull this stunt again?
Well, I think they certainly will pull the stunt. What I am absolutely committed to is that we need to have this confirmation completed before Election Day, that we owe it to the country. And it's important to understand why. This is not simply a question of one side or the other. This is a question of having the Supreme Court able to do its job as we head into what is likely to be a contested election. Joe Biden has been explicit that if he loses, he's going to challenge the legitimacy of the election. As you know, one of the chapters in One Vote Away, each chapter of the book talks about a different constitutional right, and it talks about my experience litigating some of the biggest landmark cases in the country. One of the chapters talks about Bush versus Gore. We could easily be reliving Bush versus Gore, the 2000 presidential recount, this November and this December, except unlike what happened in 2000, we could see it not just in one state, Florida, but we could see litigation in 2, 3, 4, 5 states. And if there are only 8 justices on the court could divide 4-4. And as you know, under the Constitution, a 4-4 court has no authority whatsoever. It cannot resolve a case. So we could end up with a presidential election with conflicting courts of appeals and no functioning Supreme Court able to resolve that matter. I think the Senate has an obligation to make sure we have a full court, a 9-justice court that can resolve the matter. And it's important to underscore also something, Hugh, you understand, but not everybody does. This is not to have a justice who's going to rule for one candidate or another. That's not the Supreme Court's job. It is to have a court that can provide finality and ensure that the law is followed. We want this election, if there's a bunch of litigation and fights injecting chaos, we want a court that can ensure that the Constitution and federal law are being complied with. I think that is, otherwise we're in a constitutional crisis, and the Senate has an obligation to avoid that.
I want to dwell on this, Senator, because I saw you with Judge Barrett yesterday make this point. Very few people understand. They've got to understand we're going to be in overtime likely in 3 or 4 different states. There may be federal court rulings, but there will almost certainly be state Supreme Court rulings, which may be in conflict with each other concerning the principles of a federal election that would require a Supreme Court, and only the Supreme Court can review the state Supreme Court's ruling. We have a nightmare if we have a 4-4 court. We just do. We have a nightmare on our hands.
No, that's exactly right, and you may have conflicting state Supreme Courts. You may have conflicting federal courts of appeals. In the chapter on Bush versus Gore, I talk about what happened. I was a young lawyer working in Austin on the George W. Bush campaign. That's actually where I met my wife, Heidi. We were in cubicles right down the hall from each other. And on election night, if you remember, first the networks wrongly called Florida for Al Gore. They did it while the polls were still open in Florida. People were still voting in the Panhandle. Then the networks realized they screwed up. They flipped it to uncertain. Then, several hours later, they called it for Bush and declared the presidency won. Al Gore called Bush. He conceded on the phone, said, "Congratulations, you've won." He was driving to give his concession speech, and his team said, "Wait a second, it's closer than we think." Gore retracted his concession. And what happened over the next month is the Gore team filed litigation all over the state of Florida, trying to undo the election results, trying to throw out ballots that had been cast for George W. Bush, and trying to find new ballots cast for Gore. And look, that's what anyone in a recount does. If you've lost, and they had counted the ballots and Gore had lost, you want to change the results. We ended up, I spent the entire time in Tallahassee on the ground with the legal team. I remember we had a whiteboard on the wall with 7 different lawsuits, all of which were pending simultaneously. any one of which could cost the presidency of the United States. It was utter chaos. And the case went not once but twice to the U.S. Supreme Court. First time we went to the U.S. Supreme Court, we won unanimously, 9-0. The Supreme Court vacated the Florida Supreme Court, said you got it wrong, and clarified federal law. Then the Florida Supreme Court, which was a partisan Democratic court, essentially defied the Supreme Court. We went back to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the second time the court ruled 7-2 on the merits that what was happening in Florida violated the Equal Protection Clause. But critically, the court ruled 5-4 on the remedy, that the case was over. That the ballots had been counted. They'd been counted 4 times. Every time the ballots were counted, George W. Bush had won. And the court said, enough is enough. You can't just keep recounting and recounting and recounting. And the entire country and world sat for 36 days in chaos and uncertainty, not knowing the results. If we'd had a 4-4 court instead of a functioning 9-justice court, there would have been no resolution. If you have the Federal Court of Appeals and the state Supreme Court in conflict, or if you have, say, the Ninth Circuit adjudicating a case out of Arizona and the 11th Circuit adjudicating a case out of Florida, with a 4-4 Supreme Court, nobody can resolve that conflict, and you're just in chaos. That would be irresponsible for the Senate to allow that to happen.
Do you think the media must continue to ask Vice President Biden and Kamala Harris whether or not they will pack the court?
Absolutely, they should keep asking. They should get them on record, but I think they're going to keep ducking because they're telling the left wing they want to pack the court.
Senator Ted Cruz, thank you, Senator.